Everyone, welcome to Data Engineers launch number 57. Today's topic is going to be on StreamSets for data engineering. I will be the speaker for today. I'm an engineer here at Anant. Co-organizers for this event are Rahul and myself. We are looking for guest speakers and sponsors. So if you're interested in giving a talk for Data Engineers Lunch or our sister talk, Cassandra Lunch, feel free to reach out to me, arpan.patel@anant.us. And also looking for sponsors. If you're looking to sponsor this event or our sister event, feel free to reach out to me as well. We are a part of Data Community DC. Data Community DC believes in building a inclusive environment. So no matter your race, gender, sexual orientation, everyone is welcome, and we expect respect to be given to all. Data Community DC is built of a bunch of different organizations. We at Data Engineers Lunch are part of Data Wranglers DC, but our sister launch, Cassandra Lunch, is a part of Cassandra DC. And there's a bunch of other different organizations under the umbrella of Data Community DC. So if you are interested in the various events, you can find out more on datacommunitydc.org and their events as well. So what do we cover here at Data Engineers Lunch? We cover everything related to data engineering, whether that be ETL, ELT, data wrangling, data cleanup, to then even dashboards, data exploration. We haven't done too many topics with machine learning, but if people are interested of how data engineering and machine learning can be integrated, feel free to drop a comment below, so that way we know that there's interest in it. Or if you want to give a talk on it, feel free to drop a comment below and we can reach out to you as well. So in the realm of data engineering, there's so many things and so many topics to cover. So if you have something that you've worked with that hasn't been covered here at Data Engineers Lunch, feel free to reach out to us and we can get you scheduled. So this is a time, if anyone's new, they can drop a hello in the Zoom chat or YouTube chat, say what they do with data engineering, or if they have potentially any topics they would like to discuss for data engineering or give a talk on. So group roles, if you have a question, ask it. This is meant to be a community. So if you do have any questions or comments, if you worked with something that someone's giving a talk on, feel free to drop it in the chat. Or depending on the speaker's preferences, they may prefer you first add questions or comments in the chat, or if they prefer you can just speak up and ask something while they're giving their presentation. But again, this is a community, so please do share what you know with us. Here at Anant, we design, build, and manage global real-time data analytics platforms surrounding Cassandra, Spark, and Kafka. So data engineering is a way of life for us and our bread and butter. DataStax is a partner and a sponsor. GW University is also a sponsor for having in-person events. They provide venue space. We also have some institutional and organizational sponsors. Any announcements anyone has, they can drop it in the YouTube chat or the Zoom chat. If anyone's looking for a job or is offering any jobs, if anyone has any upcoming meetups or hackathons, etc., that they'd like to promote or have people join, feel free to drop links in the chats. One thing that's currently ongoing that started last week is DataStax Astra's DB Buildathon. I can drop a link in the YouTube chat and Zoom chat once we move on. But it's essentially 3 months ongoing challenges, a challenge per month. And the top 3 winners at each round qualify to present their ideas at demo day, which is at the end on May 28th. But for each round or each month, there's challenges and prizes to win. So even if you don't win the whole shebang, you are in the running to still win prizes per the monthly challenge itself. So go ahead and check it out. I'll drop the link in a second. Some announcements for us: we are hiring full-time or part-time positions, whether that be a data platform operator, engineer, and architect. If you are interested, you can find out more at careers.anant.us. So some upcoming events we have for Data Engineers Lunch. Next week, we have a guest speaker from Infineon, Sehyo Chang. He is the CTO at Infineon, and he'll be giving a talk. But again, our sister lunches, Cassandra lunches, happen on Thursdays now at 12 p.m. Eastern. We are looking at more variable time slots for Data Engineers Lunch, but also Cassandra Lunch, so that they're more accessible to the worldwide audience on a live schedule. But again, because we live stream these directly to YouTube, you are If you subscribe to our YouTube channel, you can keep up to date with all the Cassandra lunches and data engineers lunches. So feel free, if you're watching this on YouTube right now, don't forget to like and subscribe. And you can find our YouTube channel at youtube.com/AnantCorp. And with that, we'll go ahead and move on to today's topic. But before I do so, let me go ahead and drop this link for the hackathon, buildathon in the chat. So if you're interested, you can join. Everyone. Okay. So let me reshare my screen, since I'll need the whole screen for, oh, wrong button, the whole screen for today. If I can find the share screen, and let's share desktop 1. Alrighty. Let me know if you guys can see the screen.
Yeah, I can see.
So again, as mentioned earlier, today's topic is going to be on StreamSets for data engineering. So what we're going to cover here today is kind of an introduction to StreamSets if you've never heard of it and how it can be used for data engineering. As I was doing my research and playing with StreamSets, it kind of reminded me of NiFi, at least the data collector portion of it, of how it's like a drag and drop. You put your connections in, you can do transformations along the way. But it was something really cool to learn about. And if you're interested, they have a free trial, or a free tier. It's not a trial, it's a free tier. And we'll talk about that. And that's what we're going to be using for today's demo. So if you're not familiar with what StreamSets is, it's a data integration platform built for data ops as a general whole piece. You can use it to build streaming, batch, CDC, ETL, and ML pipelines from a single UI. And you can deploy your data and workloads to any cloud. So it is cloud agnostic. So you can use Azure, AWS, or GCP. But for today, we'll be using the self-managed option under the free tier of the platform, which will be self-managed deployments via Docker. And the data ops platform consists of a couple of different things, which are the data collector engine, which I mentioned before earlier, kind of like NiFi. It's for doing the data transfers between systems, so your ingress, egress. And then there's the transform engine, which we'll talk about in a second. We'll also do a small demo of that in the demo portion. And then the control hub. The control hub is pretty cool. It's like the main UI that you can do all your build your pipelines, manage your jobs, view your metrics, etc. within. It's all available within the free tier of the data ops platform. And with the free tier of the data ops platform, no credit card required. It hasn't asked me for a credit card. And so with that, you get 2 active jobs, 2 active users, and 10 published pipelines. And they have version control within the pipelines, which I thought was pretty cool. And you can do that all within the control hub. And we'll take a look at that once we get to the demo portion. But if you see here to the right, this is kind of an example of a potential pipeline, right? So you have an ingress from Oracle, and you see that there's essentially a setup of no more data to the pipeline, stop the pipeline. So it's like a error handling catch all, or catch error, right? Otherwise, you move it through the pipeline. There's a is customer data. So it's like a conditional. If it is, it sends or makes some data transformations, and then it also can send to Snowflake or S3. So depending on how complex your pipeline is or how simple your pipeline is, you get a pretty good overview in terms of the workflow of how it moves on and on. There's a couple things we'll take a look at once we get to the actual UI of itself, but there's a ton of options that you have up here. You can add notations via sticky notes. You can preview your data, which is really cool. You could do similar things with NiFi, but I think it was easier to do it with StreamSets. And the method of previewing the data, I guess, under the hood of how StreamSets versus NiFi. Like NiFi, you have your files, right? So when you're doing your file flows, you have the designation of how the data is set, and you can see each row as a file. Versus StreamSets, it kind of does it in a more object oriented. So you could kind of do JSON structured data in your previews, or you could do it via like CSV or some sort of separated value format. So that was a pretty interesting difference between how you can preview your data between the steps. And we'll take a look at that once we get to the demo portion as well. So in the data ops platform, the structure is the control hub, which is for building, running, monitoring, and managing your pipelines at scale, depending, again, your scale on your managed deployment, either if you're doing it on the cloud or if you're doing self-managed via Docker like we are today. You have the data collector engine, which is the portion that's most similar to NiFi. And that's for like your streaming, CDC, or batch ingest data pipelines. If you want to do transformation engines, that's a separate quote unquote deployment. And we'll talk about that once we get to the demo portion. And here is where you use Spark native execution for your ETL and machine learning. So you can natively use Apache Spark, open source Spark, which we'll be doing today. I'll have Spark running on my local. You could use something like Snowflake, AWS EMR, GCP Dataproc, or even Databricks as a platform for your Spark operations. And we'll show you how to do some of the connections. But again, we'll be using local Apache Spark and we'll set it up that way. They have tons of pre-built connectors and native integrations. So their main connectors are like applications, big data, SQL or NoSQL databases, storage warehouses, and streaming tools. And then there's a ton of sources and destinations, and we'll take a look at those in a second. And then they have a good amount of Academy courses and tutorials that you can get started with. You can also find templates for pipelines. And you can import them so that way you don't have to start from scratch. You don't have to rebuild the wheel for your pipeline. If you can find an example that people have already used, you can pull it in. There is a comment from the YouTube chat. You can do basic transformation without Spark. The data collector, as long as it's not massive and in the item, like in Kafka Streams. Yes, correct. So you can do some transformations within the data collector itself. I believe we'll be doing that for the demo, for the data collection demo, and then there's also the transformation demo as well. And so again, to cover what we're going to be doing with the demo, we're going to spin up a data collector deployment from Control Hub and Docker. We're going to create a sample pipeline and preview the data to see what kind of data is happening between. So you can see it as a total from start to end of what's happening between your data. You can step between each things. It'll actually show you the input and output of what is. So it'll show you like the diff, right? So it'll show you, okay, this is what's going in and this is what's coming out. And then that will feed into the next step, which I thought was pretty cool. And then we can schedule and run the pipeline job and then view metrics of that job, which we can all do within the Control Hub UI. And then after that, we'll go ahead and spin up the transform engine deployment from Control Hub plus Docker. We'll create a sample ETL pipeline and preview the data in a similar way. And then there's two ways that we can do the transform demo. So we can use the included Spark packages, or we can use external Spark as well. So some of the things, if you're depending on your workload, you might need to run it on your own Spark machine, but some of the things are included. So like some of the SQL operations and transformation things you can use within the included package. And we'll talk about that a little bit once we get to the demo, that part of the demo. And then we'll show you how you can spin up a local Spark instance. I'll be using Spark 3.0. And show you how you can run it in client mode and then connect it and then have, when you preview the data, quote unquote, it'll actually like run a Spark job. It'll submit to your Spark UI, and we'll take a look at that once we get to that part of the demo. Okay, so coming back here, we'll take a look at the pre-built integrations as mentioned. So they have a ton of connectors you can use. So you can also search if you're looking for something specific, and you can also filter. If I can hit allow all. Okay, there we go. So we can see that there's applications, big data, whatever. And then within here, these are the origins and these are the destinations as well. So one thing I noticed was that not all destinations are also available as origins, but for the most part, most of them are. So for the most part, you can do your ingress egress as needed for most of the popular tools out there, whether that be open source or a cloud managed service like S3 or Snowflake, etc. Okay, so now coming to the control hub of the DataOps platform, I'll go ahead and log in. And once you're logged in, when you're first starting out, you'll create this default self-managed environment. I think it gets auto created for you. But again, just going through the UI itself, we have deployments. This is where our data collector and our transform engine deployments would be happening. And the nice thing that this UI does for you, it builds your Docker command for you. So you can just copy and paste it into your terminal, which is super nice. We have some engines, connections. Again, this is where you would like manage all your connections to your external sources. So managing your S3 connection, your Databricks connection, your EMR connection, etc. Build, this is where you can build fragments of pipelines where you can just reuse them as needed in different parts of your pipelines or multiple pipelines, or in general, the whole pipeline itself. I have this demo pipeline. I'm going to go ahead and just delete this for now. So we're starting clean. And then we have sample pipelines, which we'll be using today. So that way you can just see how easy it is just to pick something, try it out, and then also make edits to it as necessary. Run, this is where you set your job templates. This is where you can essentially define how a job would be happening, and then you pick whatever pipeline you're using, job instances, so whatever is running. And so once we run the job for the first instance, we can see that we'll see our job instance here, and we'll also see metrics with our associated jobs. So we'll see how much data is coming in, how much data is getting transformed, etc. We also have some scheduled tasks if you're doing anything that's requiring start, stops, or upgrades on a regular basis. So if you have any orchestration that happens on a schedule, you can track it here and create scheduled tasks as well. Monitor, again, this is where you can monitor your jobs in process. So like an overview dashboard of your whole pipelines in together, right? So you can see a bunch of different metrics here. Topologies dashboard, subscriptions. This is if you're watching for events and having actions happen on them. So if we want to say, hey, something failed, alert me at this, right? So we can create a subscription between pipelines and events in general. Reports, again, same thing. We can download reports for any alerts that were generated, any errors that happened while we were doing it, or any like offline or unhealthy engine. So as a whole platform, I think this is really cool. If anyone's used this outside of or in comparison to something like NiFi, where it's open source, I'm not aware of any managed NiFi products out there. So if anyone's used managed NiFi, if there is, versus StreamSets, if they have any input in terms of how easy it is on production level systems, or comparisons between, feel free to drop it in the chat and drop some knowledge on the community. But yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So what we're going to do here is there's two ways to do this. There's a quick start option, and then there's also the way where you can do it manually. We'll go ahead and hit quick start, but we'll go through each of the things. So what's happening here is it'll auto pick stuff for us, but I'll show you what happens in between. So we see that it's happened already, but starting from the very top, if we define a deployment, for us, the first thing we're going to start with is the data collector, right? So deployment type is going to be self-managed, right? Versus if you're going to use EC2, GCE, or Azure, right? The environment, we don't have anything necessarily set. We can pick what engine version we want and add tags as necessary. So we're going to go ahead and just leave that as is. We're going to configure our install type as Docker image versus a tarball. And then here we can share deployments between our organization and then define who has read-write access and execute access on each level, right? So for me right now, the only person in my organization is me. And so I'm just going to give myself quote unquote admin access to do all operations. And then here is where we generate the install script. But before I do this, I'm going to go ahead and go back here is when we configure this engine. So say right now, by default, we have these selected quote unquote processors, right? So we have like data generator and then certain types of stuff, right? But if we wanted to add more things to make it available to our pipeline, so for example, for us, we use Cassandra, Spark, and Kafka, right? So we would want to add the stage or configuration for allowing Cassandra to be used in our pipeline. So we'll go ahead and just select this here. Select. And we'll go ahead and hit OK. And then let's say Spark, run Spark applications. We'll go ahead and hit OK. And then Kafka, right? So Kafka, the multi-topic consumer and producer, are already included in the environments we have, or we're auto-loaded. So we'll go ahead and hit OK. And we hit Save and Next. So what that actually does is in the generate install script, it doesn't necessarily update anything in here, but it does keep track of what is available to the deployment that we've essentially edited up here. So we'll go ahead and copy and paste this into our Docker terminal. And then now that that's starting to run up, we'll go ahead and go back to here, and we can actually track how our engine's happening, right? So we see the starting bootstrap. So if we go into Docker desktop, go into here, we see that it's picking up from the control hub and our Docker instance, the steps of deployment, right? This does not take very long, but in the meantime, if anyone has any questions or comments, feel free to speak up or drop them in the chat while we wait for this to get spun up real quick.
Hey, I have a question. Do you know how specifically this works with Docker? Is it like an image? Is it pulling images from Docker Hub, or the way you specify the ID, it just knows exactly what to build?
Yeah, so let me go to the, I think it's in here, the Docker Hub, StreamSets Docker Hub. So when it runs this data collector, so we're doing this via the control hub. So you can also do this via just running the Docker command for yourself, but you still need to connect it in some way, right? So there are some stuff that it does for us. So some of these things where it's like properties, so some of the libraries that we selected, and you'll need to create Docker volumes as necessary in general. But in terms of what it's doing under the hood, if I can, let me see if I can go here. So it pulls in the StreamSets deployment URL and the deployment ID, and then the deployment token. So that's how it recognizes the definitions we've set. There's a comment in the YouTube chat. The Docker image uses a JSON config that is generated from the GUI. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Let's see. Okay, so Gotham released or added something in the chat as well. As of Data Collector Open Source 4.x, they are no longer releasing open source updates. It's open source only up to 3.x, no new releases after that. So that is something to keep in mind. If you're using this long term and you want to use it open source, it looks like they are stopping open source development after 3.x, so no more open source releases after the 4.x. So again, depending on the amount of pipelines you're running, you could potentially get away with it using the free tier that they offer in the platform. Otherwise, that is something to keep in mind if you're running this open source, specifically, again, for the data collector. Okay, so coming back to here, so our engine's started, and we'll go ahead and hit create a pipeline. So from here, we're going to name this data collector demo description. testing data collector, right? And so we select the engine type. Our engine type is data collector. We're going to go ahead and start with the sample pipeline. And from here, we can go ahead and select which ones we want. So we're going to go ahead and hit this date conversions one. And you can go ahead and see, but there's a bunch of different things you can have, right? So if you want to use something like PostgreSQL CDC to Snowflake. So if we wanted to use this, we would need to add it and then go back to our stage libraries that we selected. And we would need to add in Postgres and Snowflake as needed. And then we would also need to set up those connections. So whenever you make updates to the configuration in terms of the stage libraries you're using, it will restart, or it will require a restart of your deployment, which makes sense. But yeah, it's just something to keep in mind. So if you're running multiple pipelines on your deployment and you need to make changes for a single thing, that's just something to keep in mind. But yeah, we'll go ahead and go with this date conversion, hit save, and then authoring engine. This is the one we're currently running. If you have multiple data collector engines running, you can pick and choose which ones you want, but we'll go ahead and hit save and next. Again, select read and write access for the users in your organization, and we'll go ahead and hit open in Canvas. All right. So what we see here is a couple of different processors. So the first one is loading dates. So the nice thing I like about StreamSets is that they have processes that generate data for you. Sometimes it's hard to do that with certain tools, and you have to find and generate CSV of data and use that, or use like a Python or whatever kind of function to generate data. But having something that does it for you is very nice. But essentially we can do, or we can see configurations of each type of processor. So for this, we see that there's advanced options as well, but general, we see that you can name and describe each event or each processor that's happening. You can preview raw data, at least for the generator specifically. And then for the event data, nothing there yet. Date format. So for right now, we're doing JSON, multiple objects, no compression currently. And then for field type converter, we can see what's happening. So what it's going to do is for three of the fields, it's going to take date 1, date 2, date 3. It's going to change the type. It's going to change the format as well. And when we see the preview data, we'll see what's actually happening. And then this expression evaluator, it's going to also do some additional transformations. So again, as Rahul mentioned, you can do basic transformations without Spark in the data collector itself, right? This is happening without Spark, right? Because we don't have any Spark running right now. We're doing basic transformations just within the data collector engine itself. And then for now, just because it's a preview, we're just going to throw it to the trash. But what's going to happen here is we can check in our versions. So if we make updates here, and this is okay, this is our dev, it's going, we need to promote it to stage, quote unquote, right? So we can go ahead and check it in. So that way we don't lose this published, quote unquote, version as we make updates to the pipeline itself. We can always go back to the version, right? So what we're going to do first here is we're going to go ahead and look at some of these other options as well. Is we can also validate, share, create a job, update the libraries, duplicate, take snapshots, and configure the preview. And again, as mentioned, we can add sticky notes here to leave messages for ourselves in the pipeline, especially if it's a super complicated one. There's also this auto arrange option. So if in your, just if you have a little bit of OCD and you want to clean it up a bit, you can use the auto arrange and it'll clean it up for you. And then we can see what authoring data collector engine we're running. If we want to run this on a separate engine, we can switch that as well. So if you want to switch between engines that are running the specific flow, we can. And then here is the main thing we want to look at, the preview, right? So if we hit preview, it's automatically going to run for us and generate some data, right? So as mentioned previously in the deck itself, we see that there's input data, right? Because this is the first thing and it's a generator, it doesn't actually have any input data, but it does have output data, right? So we see that there's 6 rows with strings of dates, right? So if you want to see this, how it moves along in the process, we can click on the next thing, right? So now we see the input data that came from the output of the first step, and we see that it's making those field type conversions that were set in the configurations of the field type converter. So we see the diff, right? So we see the diff between the input and the output. So we see that it takes this input here, formats it in this specific way. But again, because we only set field conversions for the first 3 rows, that's what's only happening for here, right? Because if we go into here, we see that there's 1, 2, and 3. So it's only making changes for the first 3. And then for the expression evaluator, again, here it's doing some changes. It takes the inputs and adjusts them as needed. So small basic transformations from step to step or in between stuff. So now if we wanted to then create this as a job, what we could do is go to this, or actually more options, apologies, and we'll go ahead and hit create job. So before we do this, it'll actually prompt us for publishing this pipeline. So again, coming into the version control aspects of it. So if we hit publish pipeline, we can see that we can set a commit message, right? So this is V1, right? Publish and next. And we'll see that our version 1 has been published successfully. And again, we can share, etc., as whatever, right? So we'll go ahead and hit save and create a new job. So again, here we can do job for data collector demo, add a description as needed, job tags as needed. And here we can set which pipeline we want to run, right? So if we have multiple pipelines, we can pick which job we want or which pipeline we want to run per the job. So in here, we can set which version of the pipeline we want to run with that specific job itself, right? So if we have multiple versions of this, V1 versus V2, so if we make any changes to this pipeline, save that as V2, we can create a job for V1. We can also create a job for V2 from the same pipeline. And then we'll configure the job. Again, it's going to deploy to our local managed Docker instance of the engine. And we'll go ahead and hit any runtime parameters if you need them, but we don't have any. And we'll go ahead and hit start and monitor job. So what we'll see here is that there's real-time data that's happened, or real-time metrics that are being tracked as this job is running. So we see that this input, it's taken in 315 to 980 to 1800 to 2900. So I'll go ahead and stop this job for now, which we can do with this little button here, just so that way we can take a look at these metrics, right? So we see that as this job was occurring, you see that's now deactivating. And so we see the summary, right? So there's a real-time summary when the job is active, and then the summary in general, right? So we see that 11,000 records were generated, 11,000 records were output. And so we can see some pretty cool metrics with like the processing timer per the different stages. So from the first step, second step, the third step, and the last step. We can also see how data is moving between the actual steps as well. Throughput, processing timer, job status. Again, it's inactive, but we can see when jobs were started, jobs finished, refreshes, etc. Data collectors, again, it's running on the one I have running right now. Any configuration, rules, again, this is if we want to have additional metrics. So we have metric rules, data drift rules. So if data's, excuse me. So if data's skewing, we want to know, right? And if we want to set up notifications, we can do it via emails or webhooks. And then we can also see history as jobs are running. So if we trigger a job once, we can see history for the second job, third job, etc. So that will wrap up the data collector portion. Does anyone have any questions before we move on to the data transformation part? Or sorry, the transformer engine part of the demo?
Yeah, I've got a quick one.
Yeah.
So right now we're showing this very like linear pipeline, A to B to C. Are there unions or join functions that you can use that are, have you explored that at all?
Yes, I know you can use the Spark SQL to do unions. I don't know if there's unions available in the data collector itself, but I know that can be done via the Spark SQL packages in the transformer engine.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. There is a question in the chat. How is this different from something like Airflow versus NiFi? Does NiFi have anything like this? So I think the main difference in the UI, at least the UI for StreamSets is a lot better than NiFi's. But I think in terms of like overall metrics collecting and real-time summaries, the way that it's displayed in the UI itself for StreamSets is better than NiFi from my experience. In terms of Airflow, I guess there's differences in between that. Airflow, you build your DAG to then get metrics on, right? Versus here, you can build it within the UI itself. So it's a little bit less code, but you can make code, and which we'll take a look at in the transformer engine of the part of the demo, where you can actually write Scala functions or Python functions or JavaScript functions or Node functions to do your transformations. But I think in terms of it compares a little bit to Airflow in terms of the metrics and the visualizations you get, but in terms of actual like low code, no code aspects of creating a data engineering pipeline, it compares to NiFi a little bit better, if that makes sense. Or if that answers your question, Rahul. Okay, while we are waiting on that, because since I know YouTube is a little bit delayed, we'll go ahead and stop this Docker container for now. So we have some time to talk about the transformer engine. Okay, let's go back to, let's trash this real quick. Okay, cool. So now just do a quick check, Docker PS, nothing is running. So I'll be moving a little bit quicker through this portion. But we'll go ahead and do a quick start deploy for the transformer. We won't do any configuring because we won't need them for now. We'll go ahead and just get this running. Let's go here, paste. And while that's running, I'll go ahead and CD into my Spark, Spark 3, and then spin start master. Let's go to localhost 8080. Okay, let's go ahead and start a worker up. Okay, just make sure that worker is up. Okay, now we have standalone Spark with one worker. Let's check here. See if our engine's good to go. It's still in the starting engine point. But again, just to give you a quick breakdown of what we're going to be doing in this part of the demo is we're going to be also using a sample pipeline, which does a transformation and calculation, actually. Well, quote unquote calculation, but it'll essentially take grades from rows, calculate if it's an A, B, or C. Actually, let me do this demo for transformer engine. We'll do a transformer sample pipeline next. We'll pick the Scala UDF. Go ahead and hit save. Save and next. Save and next, and then opening Canvas. Okay, so I won't go over the nitty gritty, but we'll just take a look at what's happening. So here we see that it's going to generate some JSON data, which is going to give us student ID, test ID, score ID, and a couple of versions of that, right? Date format. This is being a little slow, apologies. So this quick refresh. Okay. So let's click on sample input, data format, JSON. So this create UDFs. So again, as mentioned, this is what's actually going to be running Scala code on top of Spark. So it's actually going to submit a Spark job to do this transformation. So it's going to take the letters or take the string of the value of what the person scored on the test and then generate a letter grade based on that. So if it's a 90, it's an A or greater than equal to A, B, C, etc. And then in the use UDF, this is what's actually going to run that UDF we created. And that's going to actually create, take the input of the score value and then export it as a new key value in the JSON of letter. And then it's going to generate a score. And then it's going to write to a UDF. This, we're actually not going to write it to anywhere. But we're just going to preview it just so you can see what this aspect looks like. So if we go ahead and hit preview, so what we're doing here is we can do configured manage or cluster manager. So if we're using standalone Spark or one of our deployed Spark managed services, we would use configured cluster manager, but there's two ways of doing this. One is the embed Spark libraries, which again, as mentioned, when you select your stage libraries, one of the libraries is the Spark SQL. So for here, we can pick what things we want to see in the preview. But we'll go ahead and just run this for now, just to show you what it looks like. And so this isn't actually running anything on our Spark cluster, right? This is using the embedded Spark libraries for now. Let's give this a minute. All right, so we see that again, because we're generating data at the beginning, there's no input, but there is output, right? So we have a couple records, and then we have scores, student ID, and test ID. And then as we go to the create UDF, we see that there's input. Obviously, we're just creating the UDF, so there's no actual input or output. But once we pass it to the use UDF, we actually see a diff between the input and the output, right? So we're just passing along the inputs as we go along in the process, but we don't actually make transformations until we get to the use UDF section, which is, again, it'll take the score, it'll generate a new key value pair of the letter, and then the letter key, and then the value of whatever letter grade it is, right? So if this is greater than or equal to 90, it's an A, greater than or equal to 70, it's a C, or however that function is set, right? So out of the 10 preview records, we see that it's being done for all of them, right? So then in the write UDF, nothing's actually happening because we're not actually outputting the data anywhere. So what we're going to do now is we're going to show you how you can do this for standalone Spark or how to connect it, right? So if you're if you're connected to something here, you see that we need to click out of the actual processors themselves. So we can go to the pipelines configuration itself, top level configuration. So for here, we see that we have our name, description, labels, execution. We can switch between batch and streaming, cluster. So this is where we'll actually need to set our type, right? So if we have cluster manager type, if we click, we can see that there's Spark Standalone, Hadoop, Dataproc, EMR, Databricks, whatever, right? So for us, we're going to be using none local. Or sorry, not non-local. We're going to be using standalone cluster. Our master URL, we can copy and paste from here. Paste this in. And then right now we're running client mode, right? Or when we run our Spark process, run it in client mode. Application name, that's a parameter you can set, so it'll be the pipeline and then the title of it. So if you want to add additional items to whatever the job submission is, so that way it's like pipeline title and then date, right? Or time, whatever, but you already get that in the Spark UI, right? And then you could have log levels and then additional Spark configurations, which I thought was pretty neat, where when you're setting what kind of Spark job, so depending on the Spark job, if it's a heavy Spark job, you can allocate more cores and memory to it, or if it's something very small, you can adjust it so that way you can have multiple pipelines running all at the same time. Parameters, again, you can put additional things in here and then access them within here. Notifications, so on, run, error, stopped, finished. We can add emails, webhooks, so if we need to notify something or notify a distribution list, we can do so. And again, if you have Dataproc or EMR or one of the other managed options open or connected, you can set specific configurations for those as well. So what we're going to do here is we are going to now go ahead and preview this with the test run. Or actually, we'll just do a preview for now. But what's going to happen is we're going to switch the preview using from embedded Spark libraries to configured cluster manager. So that will then use the configurations we've set down here. So we'll go ahead and hit run preview. And we'll see here that it'll say preview status starting, and then it'll say preview status submitting job, right? And then we'll actually see it right here, right? Submitting Spark job to whatever, right? So then if we go into our Spark UI, if we give this a quick refresh, we now see our application that's come through, right? So we see our pipeline, transformer demo for transformer engine, and then test run, preview run. But again, because this isn't a submitted job, literally, it's not using the actual, the additional aspects we added. But we can see how we connected local Spark with the transformer engine, and it was very simple to do. So I haven't tested connecting it with Databricks, but I'm assuming it's not that much difficult or that much more difficult. But yeah, that wraps up today's demo. I'll go ahead and kill this since we don't need it for now. But we can take a look at the logs, right? So if we want to click on the application, we can see what's happening. See if there's any std error. So we see here, execute commands, nothing useful there. Let's see, nothing useful here. But yeah, so if you need to look at your Spark logs for the specific application that your transformer engine ran, you can always do so. So yeah, that wraps up today's demo. If anyone has any questions, feel free to speak up or drop them in the chat. Actually, it looks like there was something in the chat. Does Airflow have a drag and drop origin destinations for pipelines like StreamSets / NiFi, or we always need to write Python code for origin destination? Yes, Gautam. Airflow doesn't have an interactive pipeline builder, as far as I know. There might be some tool out there that can help you do that, but Airflow, it needs a DAG that you define in code for you to be able to see it in your graph view or tree view or whatever view you're using. But there's no intuitive low code, no code builder of a pipeline for Airflow like there is with NiFi and StreamSets, if that answers your question. All right. With that, if no one has any more questions, if you're watching this on YouTube right now, don't forget to like and subscribe. All of the Data Engineers lunches are available on the Data Engineers lunch playlist. And again, you can find all of those videos on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/AnantCorp. And there is a comment from Rahul. I think those are for different uses anyway. Yeah. So I think there are, that's a good point as well to have and always to keep in mind. But again, if you're using the data collector for open source, again, keep in mind that open source is not releasing any more updates as of 3.x and beyond. So if you're interested in using data collector open source, just be aware that it's probably not going to be maintained, or keep up to date with it. Maybe there's community updates to it and people are keeping it along that way. But yeah, if there are no more questions, thank you for joining us here at Data Engineers Lunch. We will see you guys next week. We have a guest speaker from Infineon, Seiho Chang, and yeah, that's it. Take care.